yesterday was all about presenting the results of the endeavours so far for Go4. Today we're thinking more about the future. And there's some very, very interesting conversations to be had, I think, this morning. But first of all, we are going to say hello to you from Mario. So Mario is going to welcome us in his language, and I want then you to say it back to him. It's going to be easy.
Kokomang ke wisese the mikran ke mkusinga ke kokomang kang the mikran ke taman chawa ke conference yang the mikran da kum tutu tang am conference da muslim kan atekam diwi hawam chua dai tutu ge ai conference ya ke kokomang kang manjoi.
Great stuff. So now just say just the one word that they can good morning.
Yeah.
Okay.
Kokomang.
Okay.
Say everybody kokomang. 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 Aïwayu, Y3. 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 Y3.
I wouldn't trust them an inch. I thought, what was wonderful, I thought you were sniffing every time you tried to click. It could go horribly wrong for you all. But I'm now going to hand over to Doris to introduce this first session, which, as you see, has a cast of thousands. And you'll need the microphone.
Good morning, everybody. We hopefully have here the most international of all our panels. It's the Global Voices panel, and it's also an experiment. And just to test their commitment, these are people from some of the hottest countries in the world, and they have come from their summer. So we ordered this snow and this wind in order to see whether they're coming, and they're all here. And the experiment is that this is a keynote group. So we have a similar time to a keynote speaker, but we wanted you to hear the voices from all over the world, 10 from Progress, and we have one guest from Responsibility. So everybody will only speak with one punchy statement for 2 minutes. And I brought a musical instrument. If they go over the 2 minutes, you will hear a sound, and then we will move over to the next person. And everybody will introduce themselves, and you, I hope, will be very impressed with the presence we have assembled for you on this panel. Thank you, and I hand over to the first speaker, who is Michael.
My name is Michael Davis. I'm at the Center for the Study of Ethics in the Professions at Illinois Institute of Technology in Chicago. I'm a philosopher by training. My work in the last 30 years has concerned, among other things, engineering ethics. I'm supposed to say what struck me about RRI. For me, who reported on broader impacts, the one thing that stood out for RRI is the idea of interactive involvement in the research from the beginning. That, I think, is something which has not hit the U.S. yet, and certainly not hit our funding agencies. And I was disappointed at how little attention that was given over the last day, because I think that is a novel way to approach research and to make it relevant to society. That from the beginning, the end users and other parties would be involved in the design and carrying out of the research and development, and all the way from the very beginning to the ultimate product. And that's all I have to say.
Can I just say one more thing before I hand over to Australia? We brought PowerPoints, which I will start now, which will give you, whilst we speak, pictures from all our engagements from all over the world. But now I hand over to Australia.
I'm John Weckert from the Centre of Applied Philosophy and Public Ethics at Charles Sturt University in Australia. My background is mainly in philosophy but also in IT. Our government recently announced a new national innovation and science agenda where the focus is on commercialisation and collaboration with industry. As far as I can see, this has only just come out, and as far as I can see, there's nothing in it explicitly on responsibility or on anything to do with RRI. Research and innovation seem to be, from reading the document, responsible to the extent that they benefit the economy, and there doesn't seem to be anything more than that in it. And our Prime Minister said recently that publish or perish, talking to academics, publish or perish will be replaced by collaborate or crumble. That's collaborate with industry. Okay, thanks. That's all I've got to say.
And now over to Malaysia.
Okay. Good morning. Thank you to the Go4 organizer for having this session, Voices Around the World. My name is Rohaya. I'm from University of Malaysia, Sarawak. We are from Malaysia and located in Borneo region. UNIMAS is actually one of the research partner in the responsibility. And then if you Google keyword, Google now and put keywords RRI Malaysia, you will get Rubber Research Institute Malaysia, RRI in bracket. But if you put another keyword, RRI Malaysia with Europe, you will start to see that responsibility, UNIMAS, and also Go4 projects. So this is actually the connection. My point is that there is already a connection between RRI and Europe. I will just articulate within the context that I can understand. RRI is indeed a paradigm shift in thinking from my own standpoint. When responsibility introduced RRI in Malaysia, we have several important stakeholders that come from policymakers, R&D community, NGO, and players. And then we come to certain consensus from this dialogue that we have that there is actually a real benefit through the RRI. The only thing that we need is just a platform like what responsibility deliver. This is actually forum and observatory. So this is something that that we find it a tangible benefit. I guess the unequal information access, for example, this is actually that lead to the agreement. And in university that we serve, for example, we have a mission like bringing sustainability for diverse and dispersed community. For over 20 years, we actually working with rural community, with community around us, the marginal community. And then in this context, there are a few dimensions that actually being propagated through RRI. We actually integrated that. Ethics, governance, for instance, and then engagement. You know, when you go to the rural community, sometimes the common ethical standards, sometimes that we accept, prescribed through the university institutions seem to be superficial. I'm glad to see that, this ethical standard, for example, is actually for our needs, but not for the community needs. So in this case, I see RRI is actually beyond an ethical common standard, and I think this is actually great. That's it, Doris. Thank you.
Thank you very much. From Malaysia, now to South Africa.
Good morning. My name is David Kaplan. I'm an academic, University of Cape Town, but I also work extensively with the South African government on innovation. I'm on the board of the South African Technology Innovation Agency. What I'd like to point to is a rising phenomenon in third world countries. We have seen an unprecedented movement of people out of poverty, people who still are very poor but who now have disposable income. In response to the income and the demand, we've seen innovation increasingly shift to products and also production processes, and indeed ways of doing innovation that are more appropriate to the needs of those poor people. People, as I say, who've emerged out of poverty but are still poor. So we are seeing lots of new products that are geared to poorer consumers. We're seeing lots of new production processes. For example, we're seeing much cheaper, much more robust sewing machines, metal bashing machines, tractors, tillers, etc., that allow new producers to enter the market in developing countries. Lots of products, lots of processes, particularly from China, also from India, Brazil, and other countries. This is what we call inclusive innovation. We also see engagement of end consumers in the process itself of innovation in all sorts of dynamic and interesting ways. So I think, and I do believe, that throughout the third world, particularly in the emerging market countries, we are seeing a sea change in the way that innovation is done by the corporate sector, but also in the way that it's supported by governments. And I think this issue of inclusive innovation is really a game changer, because we are seeing now innovations that are directly set to meet the needs and to engage poorer consumers. And my view about RRI is to take it forward. The RRI needs to see and understand those processes, how they're being conducted, what the impacts could be and are, and how to improve with that. So I'm looking for more engagement, if you like, on the part of the European Union in those processes that are happening in emerging markets. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now from South Africa to China.
Good morning. I'm Han Bing from Institute of World Economics and Politics, Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. At present, the grand challenges facing China are uneven development between rural areas and urban areas, insufficient supply of public services, enlargement of income gap, and poverty-stricken population in rural areas. So in order to confront with these challenges, the proposal for the formulation of the 13th five-year plan for national economic and social development, which released in October last year, set forth a general goal of completing the building of a moderately prosperous society in all respects. And it clarifies 5 approaches to realize the general goal, that is innovative development, coordinated development, open development, green development, and shared development. So I think those approaches tackling about challenges along with the societal desirability of RRI, societal desirability criterion of RRI as interpreted in Europe. In China, the science and technology innovation policies emphasizes that only when the scientific and social and technological achievements are combined with national needs, people's demands, and market demands, and the innovation value be truly achieved, and the innovation-driven development be realized. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And from China now to India.
Thank you, Doris. My name is Sachin Chaturvedi. I'm an economist by training. Our take in this project was largely to evolve an index to see how issues related to access, equity, and inclusion, AEI, may contribute in terms of understanding how RRI should work. And that way we see movement along RRI as an expansion of what we yesterday discussed, technology assessment. So the features that are there in technology assessment, RRI does that kind of value addition. In countries where resources are limited, the priorities and budgetary allocations cannot be confined to innovation, which are not leading to innovative economic policies. And from that point of view, the idea of distributive justice within the framework of technology innovation is extremely important, and RRI has that potential to bring that out. We also have tried to come out in terms of this index to be calculated across different states within India to see how principal component analysis and rank correlation across different indicators is possible. So some empirical work in terms of how RRI can be conceptualized is important, and we in this project we have tried to do that. The third thing that we have evolved along this line is in terms of Amrita Sen's idea in terms of how you do the distributive justice. He, of course, picked up information society, but we have tried to see how this distributive justice brings in the concept of innovation within the framework of access, equity, and inclusion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we go from India to South Africa to Hennie, who is also on the screen, where he held the Kalahari Festival and using it for dissemination of progress.
Thank you very much. And I want to, just to say it's quite a big festival that we have annually in South Africa, so please come and join us. My name is Hennie Swart. I'm the director of the South African San Institute. I bring a message from South Africa in the context of the San indigenous peoples with focus on research where traditional knowledge is the basic source of research themes. RRI is possible and so much more effective and rewarding if the people's knowledge is recognized and shared, and where the people, usually the end beneficiaries, are involved within the process of the research. Not only will the research be more accurate, it will also have the value of the people. This is a form of benefit sharing. So in other words, just to summarize, if the people are part of the research, it becomes a joint venture and benefits of the research are shared during the process. And that's my message. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now to the Philippines.
Thank you, Doris, and good morning, everybody. Severe weather disturbances devastate my country, the Philippines, where I am a professor of political science and where I work with indigenous peoples, women, and the urban poor. The most recent was Typhoon Haiyan, which claimed almost 10,000 lives. And up till now, hundreds of thousands of women, the elderly, girls, are taking on untraditional work, including prostitution, because the man in the family cannot provide for so much deprivation in the communities. Island countries in the Pacific face daily the threat of submergence due to global warming. These people I have talked about are the most vulnerable and highest at risk, but they made the least contribution to global warming. Research and innovation from the perspective of my country and my people, the most vulnerable, must be committed to the interests and the protection of these people. When we do research, when we make decisions or we influence decision makers on the allocation of funding for research, innovation, and production, we must bear in mind carbon footprints and who are paying the price for the disturbance, for the destruction of the environment. On our part in the Philippines, in severe military and political repression, we are trying to do our part by capacitating people whose voices have been unheard, by capacitating them to speak and insist and claim on that political space that had been denied them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Tim. Very good, as usual. Now we have completed the session of the Global Voices, but we have two. I hope the second speaker is still on his way. We have two institutions represented here. So this is now over to TDR and World Health Organization.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Rob Terry. I work for the World Health Organization and the Special Program for Tropical Disease Research and Training. A central part of the mission of the World Health Organization is to see that access to healthcare is available to all as a right and not as a privilege that's based on wealth. I think the Ebola crisis, the growing crisis in antibiotic resistance, and many other neglected diseases, they demonstrate that we need to think of new ways to prioritize and fund the health product research and development process so that it delivers drugs and vaccines that are effective and affordable for all when we need them, and where commercially driven R&D will not deliver them. The framework of responsible research and innovation offers a number of approaches which will help us achieve that aim. And it reminds me, I think, of a quote that Einstein once said, which is, "We can't solve the problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them." Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have now concluded, except for the last speaker, whom I hope will join us. You can probably get the message of inclusion that we've been trying to promote throughout our project, including yesterday from this panel. And this also means we want to include you. This is why we only had these short statements, because now we have 25 minutes with Vivian's help to get your questions for this panel.
What a wonderful set of presentations. Fantastic. Thank you so much. So let's think about, I mean, you put out a challenge there of how to have inclusion with a view to, particularly about carbon footprint. How do you see that inclusion? How do you see it working? Yes.
You always ask very difficult questions. There's no single formula. There's no formula. Actually, I think we must identify the crucial dimensions of the problem. I think one which we are beginning to do more seriously in the country is really helping people who are most severely affected by understanding. So our research, for example, at the end of the research, we return the research to them and we discuss the findings. And we ask them, how can you use these findings so that you can influence policy at various levels in the country?
And what's their response?
Of course, yes, they understand that they need to speak. But there are situations like in the Philippines where repression could be intense and it's not easy. But there are ways, legal ways of doing it. And friends in the media are very important factors. There are very important actors here.
Okay. Anyone want to come back with any questions to our panel? And tell us who you are.
Okay, my name is Yuan Ling. I'm also from Chinese Academy for Social Sciences. I'm also with this group. My question goes to David, South Africa, because you talked about the some characteristics that the emerging markets share. So I just want to listen a little bit in details that you think at the demanding end and at the supply end of goods that taken into consideration of RRI, that is there some characteristics that the emerging economies share, as well as do you see any spaces that the emerging economies and the developed economies could collaborate in this case as well? So.
Well, thank you for the question. I think there were two questions. One, the last one was really around collaboration. The other one, I think, is really asking whether we share some common characteristics and what the possibilities are. So I think it is very important that we do share common characteristics. I think we do indeed share common characteristics. So the sort of, just to take an example, the sort of products that in China have been developed for poor producers, let's say in transforming metals, in bashing metals, or in sewing clothes, cheaper sewing machines, more robust machines, etc., that are appropriate to Chinese conditions, are also very appropriate to African conditions, because developing countries face similar problems. Lack of a single power of a reliable power supply, for example, might be just one example. So the products that are produced in China or India or elsewhere have application elsewhere in third world countries. And so I think that there's lots of room for collaboration on exactly those sorts of issues. And I think through the BRICS, for example, we're starting to see some forms of collaboration across national boundaries emerging, although I think there's lots of room for more than that.
But it does need people working with people to articulate what their main problem is, because we may perceive the major problem to be interrupted power supply, but for all we know, their priority problem might be something completely different.
Absolutely. So the engagements of the end users is absolutely critical in all of this. So I think there is some context dependency. I mean, the issues in Africa are somewhat different from China or India, but there are some very common problems met in all these three countries. So I think we will see, and we are starting to see, more collaboration across boundaries of a South-South type, which I think are very important, because we've always thought about this North-South, but South-South is very important and I think is rapidly growing. And I'm hoping through the BRICS process we'll see more of that. But of course, engagement with Europe or the United States, the developed countries and developing countries, remains very, very critical, And I think in a lot of areas, but particularly if you think about advanced electronics and all these areas, the more high-tech, more high-science areas, the application of those into issues that are of concern to developing country consumers and producers are very important. So in medical technologies, for example, where we are starting to see some very important new developments, products that are maybe 10% of previous cost, much more robust. These frequently involve engagement between researchers in developing countries and developed countries. So if you look, for example, even at the patent score, which is not necessarily a very good indicator, but more and more patents are co-invented between the developed countries and the developing countries. And that kind of collaboration, these are global issues. And I think that we need to have much more fora to share those and much more common platforms between developed and developing countries and within the developing country context as well.
And of course, we're beginning to see, aren't we, reverse innovation, by which I mean, in Africa, for instance, much more advanced, you could argue, in telecoms than we are in Europe. You know, telecoms is used for mobile phone and mobile technologies are much more advanced because they've kind of jumped the step of landlines. So there are lots of things that are now coming the other way.
No, absolutely, and I think you're right. I think that the emerging markets often don't have the inherited old legacy technologies. Sometimes allows those jumps to happen. And if you look around and you ask yourself, one of the things that I think distinguishes today from where we were 20 years ago is how many powerful corporations with leading technologies from southern countries are now engaged in the European and the United States context. And how is that happening and why is that happening? Well, they become very effective at innovators in their own domestic markets, which they understand much better than the corporates from developed countries do. And on the strength of that innovation, on the strength of innovating for their consumers, they can take their products elsewhere. So some of the products that are developed in emerging markets today are very great consequence to poorer people in Europe and the United States, of whom, of course, there are still many. And there's a large market there, I think, for more robust, cheaper products that emerge from emerging markets and that are of importance to poorer consumers, even in the developed countries.
I mean, Rob, we're already seeing diagnostics, fantastically innovative, paper-based diagnostics developed by George Whitesides and his group at Harvard. And this is sort of where you're using microfluidics so that you have a tiny piece of paper and it does several tests at once and they cost, less than $1, something like that. But actually that innovation is, aimed at developing countries, is now having a huge impact the other side of the fence, as it were. How important is that innovation in the involvement of people and the drive that's coming from there? How important is that involvement there?
No, I think it's key, actually. For many years, and particularly many scientists, the focus is often on just coming up with a technology that's going to cure something. And there's been a growing realization that, in actual fact, it's all about implementation and that last mile. In terms of reverse innovation, just an example that I can think of, which is I think quite an interesting case where certainly in Europe and North America we're very used to seeing incubators for newborn babies, which are quite complicated pieces of machinery. They have a number of different channels and all sorts of technical kit that actually needs quite an experienced person to actually operate it. But in Bangladesh, they were able to develop a machine which had just an on and an off button, and it worked. It was able to survive power cuts and those types of things. And then GE Electric have taken that and produced a version which they were able to sell in Europe, and it's become their top seller in Central Eastern Europe. And that really is reverse innovation, because it actually stripped right back to what was necessary, something that was robust, something that was affordable. So I think that actually, to me, is very interesting, this idea that there is innovation all around the world, but there is innovation certainly in the low and middle income countries, which will have an impact where we are in Europe and North America.
And for instance, using, I know we probably all hate them, but Coca-Cola using their distributed chains for vaccines. Yeah, the Coca-Cola example is often quoted about how you need to think about social innovation and how you may need to introduce the value chain into some kind of development. And that just means on every incremental step of the distribution, there is the opportunity for people to actually essentially make a living, to make a small amount of money. But that money allows the distribution, and this is particularly for oral rehydration tablets, that a device, a box essentially was designed that would sit on top of the crate of Coca-Cola and would sit, therefore, on the distribution network of Coca-Cola, which meant, frankly, I've been everywhere, and you can't go anywhere in the world where you can't buy Coke, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you sit. But this sits on top of that, and therefore, again, it was really thinking about the very real and quite crafted ways that companies are able to get their products right penetrate very, very deep into the market. And so, in a sense, within the public sector and within development, we actually need to embrace those ideas and that innovation. And I think, it's a good example of how you can combine the two areas for a social benefit and a social need. I think just speaking to something that Dave was talking about in the area that I'm working on, which is financing and financing of R&D, we are very used to thinking in a kind of very traditional sort of donor and recipient model, and we've almost got sort of caught in that. But on product development and for health products, one of the things we're working on now is if we had a pooled funding arrangement, which means that many people, I'm talking about governments here, can join together with contributions that could then stimulate and catalyse product development for affordable, effective and available drugs, diagnostics and vaccines. Then we have a mechanism which, in a sense, can supplement and encourage this R&D where we've got no markets, where we know the commercially driven R&D just will not provide a response. And already what we're seeing, interestingly, is that the first member states that are interested in that, we've had resources in from Brazil, from South Africa, and from India. And I think that's incredibly exciting. They're not large sums of money, but a pooled fund means the entry level is quite reasonable. But it means everyone can share the risk, and at the end of the day, research is a risk. You're funding, to be honest, mostly you're funding failure, and you need to cover that cost. But it also allows for shared benefit, coming together for these types of global problems, and so sharing the risk and sharing the benefit. Now, the focus for that financial mechanism was very much these drugs and diseases which won't affect us here, but for those populations, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, throughout Asia, where the population is poor, the burden of disease is high, but it's not something that's going to spread, and so there's no real market. Now that sounds like something that's very important, but elsewhere, and yet, something that will affect all of us and is affecting all of us right now is antibiotics and antibiotic resistance, and the same situation is starting to reveal itself in that there isn't really a market, commercial market, either because when a product hits the market, resistance comes in very quickly, and so there isn't the opportunity to recoup some of the R&D costs. In those situations, are people, because that there's a huge need for innovation in that particular area, but there's also a need for social innovation, because the thing that happens with antibiotics is that they then get sold in half doses and they're counterfeited. Would not the involvement of people from all those various regions affected, how are they involved, and how could RRI be applied to that particular situation?
Well, I think, I mean, again, I think when we think about research, it's a wide spectrum of different types of activities, and certainly when it comes to the responsible use of antibiotics, it's something that we all have a part to play. It's not just the prescribing from clinicians. I think all of us need to be very aware, and therefore, so some of it is around education and engagement. I think some of it also, again, it comes back to the idea of having simple, easy to use and point of care diagnostics. I want to focus
you on the involvement.
Yeah, well, I think the involvement is very much in the case of it's understanding disease. It is an education process as much as an involvement. I think the design of a new antibiotic has to be able to operate within the environment for where it's being sent.
And that speaks to the involvement of people.
Exactly.
And you were talking, Sachin, about distributive justice and how important that is. And something Rob said touched that point about there needing to be value and an income for people all along the distribution chain rather than at one end of that. Presumably that's something that you'd be keen to see.
Yeah, sure. I think the situation that has arisen in most of the emerging economies because of the rapid economic growth is this huge inequality. And that inequality has multiplied in the last couple of years. As a result, access to technology is confined to some elite. And technology development is confined to specific firms, which are selling it off at a very high price. So in order to achieve that, what I described as need for distributive justice, that is where the role of RRI comes in. And how you prioritize in terms of innovation, how you prioritize in terms of access, and how you prioritize in terms of ensuring equity when you decide the R&D budgetary allocations by the government, and of course through collective efforts like the one that Rob just described.
I was just thinking, we've got some questions here. I was just thinking about washing machines. I'm just going to ask any woman at random. Divna, how many programs do you use on your washing machine?
2 or 3.
Yeah, excuse me. If you had women involved in the design of washing machines, they would only have 3 settings. Men design them, and they have 45 programs. So there's a question over here. Let's go. Sorry, that was a terribly sexist remark, but I'm not ashamed.
I was just wondering if I, as a man, had asked that. Yeah. So Alex, Professor of Science Communication in Germany, thank you very much for the opportunity to ask a question. Well, we're privileged to coordinate a project now in the most recent SPOFS call, which is expected to take forward the Go4 project results and others from FP7 projects. And methodologically, we're also taking a comparative approach, an intercultural, transcultural approach, with 24 partners from Africa, Asia, and Europe. And that is why I'm particularly interested, if I may take us back from the product level, from the antibiotics and so on, to the project level, as to your experiences, how you managed to deal with avoiding the impression down when entering the so-called developing countries. Let's say, here comes the white man from Brussels trying and failing to explain to people down south how apparently responsibility in research and innovation is supposed to look like. In terms of mutual learning, yeah, how did you manage that challenge?
Doris,
as you can probably tell, in the Progress project, we managed simply by including all major emerging economies, and we always had. It never actually came up in our project that there could be inequality or white people telling other people what to do, and I think just the question not arising is the most important thing. But I'm sure other people on my panel of equals have something to say on how to do it if somebody
who would
indeed
like to
comes.
tackle that? One of you tackle that.
Wait, just
Okay.
Well, we have these issues as well. I think we've reflected on the first time that we tried to bring the RRI in Borneo. The innovation system reflecting at various levels, it can be very complex on that context because in Malaysia, I think most developing nation is not actually equal. When we talk about science, technology, advancement, of course, there's actually a field of threat coming in and so on. But, at the level of, again, about engagement, inclusivity, dialogues, that's actually where we actually attain even up to the most difficult, even up to the policymaker. We actually managed to convince them, to actually see the benefit, even up to the articulation, up to the extent that they can serve as a reflection. So I guess you just have to put that first step, to go through this. Of course, it's actually a lot of challenge that you have to pass through, but there's actually always a way as long as we have a lot of dialogues, engagement, like what is actually being propagated through the RRI dimension or context. So that's my response. Yeah.
Okay. So there was a question here and one over there. So let's start here. And who are you, sir?
I'm Gilles Saint-Martin. I'm from CIRAD in France. CIRAD is a research center working on agriculture for developing countries. So we have a lot of collaboration with South Africa, with Malaysia, with India, with the Philippines, as well and other countries. So I just want to return to the discussion we had before. And some panelists mentioned distributed justice, equity. Some other mention voice of the people. When we are talking about RRI, I'm just asking myself, what is at stake? Is it that, or is it really democracy? In many countries, democracy principle is not so much respected. I'm just asking myself, is it applicable? Is RRI applicable on countries where democracy is still far from being respected? It's not only developing countries, it could happen in developed countries as well. We can see the discussion today we have in Europe or we have in the USA, and sometimes if the society is going in that direction, I'm just asking myself, would that be applicable?
Let's ask that question. Who's going to tackle that one? I'm going to go to the political science. You're a political scientist, aren't you? So is it possible, is RRI possible in a country which is not a democracy?
Well, from what I understand of democracy, I think you cannot really you cannot really have accountable, responsible, equitable, responsive products, research, and innovation if the people are silent, are afraid, are not participating in crucial decision making, which to me is essentially what democracy is.
So there you are, you've got your answer. Thank you for that. Let's hear first.
Marianne de Blonde from VITO. VITO is a Flemish technological research organization, and since a few months I'm coordinator of an RRI project, Horizon 2020 RRI project. I have a question to Professor Weckert. You told us that recently in Australia there was a new document describing the innovation policy, and that this document stresses commercialization and collaboration with industry. I was wondering whether from within the research and innovation community in Australia they feel the need to open up this document to public debate, whether this is really what responsible research and innovation is about. And the second question is, would you consider it to be part of the responsibility of responsible research and innovation to urge politicians to open up the debate to the aims of research and innovation?
Okay, let's...
Is my question clear?
If I haven't forgotten the first part. The second part is part of RRI to actually convince the policymakers, the politicians and so on that it is important. I think the answer to that is clearly yes. Why it isn't included, I think, is sort of historical. we've had some interesting political situations in Australia in the last few years, and up until very recently, although the same party is still in power, we've had a change in prime ministers, and under the previous prime minister there was very little discussion about science and innovation or technology or anything like that. The focus was more on, getting money from mining coal and selling it and whatnot. The new Prime Minister has brought in now, or focused the discussion a lot more on science and technology and innovation, but to date there hasn't been this sort of ethical or RRI aspect to it. Hopefully that will come. I mean, the research funding bodies have a list of things that constitute good research and so on. A lot of those are ethical things, the standard ones like, not rigging your data and all of that sort of thing, but that's general everywhere, I guess. But we haven't had that focus on RRI in Australia to date. I think we should, and it certainly doesn't seem to be a high priority in the current document that has just come out.
I mean, what you're really speaking to there is actually the need for, yes, the bottom-up approach, as you're all illustrating, is terribly important, but actually you do need some top-down influence in terms of, putting a stamp of approval on something.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, there was a question there, Roger. Just briefly, if you would.
Sorry, okay. My question follows on the question of the professor behind me here, talking about the silent voice of those in undemocratic countries. So that's clearly a challenge which is ongoing for RRI.
And of course there are silent voices in democratic countries
too,
let's not forget.
I just wanted to refer to another silent voice which came out of the challenge that Robert Madeline gave yesterday. And he talked about, it came under the question, shall we close the Cartesian dream? And how are we counting with the silent voice of nature? And Tim mentioned it, of course, with regard to climate change. It's a massive sea change in the world's perspective as it's trying to acknowledge where does the voice of nature fit in. And as we're all committing to action on climate change, how is that voice of nature being heard in RRI? And the way he put the question was, he said, how do we count with nature? It's the planet, not ourselves. So communicating with communities, of course, and people is very, very important, and it's actually the essential part of RRI. But the question, I don't know if anyone would like to comment on it, is how do we also comment on
poverty? Naturally, you want to get out of poverty. Actually, the planet, frankly, is a long way down your list of priorities.
Yes. So we're talking about the future generations. If we don't take the voice of the planet in, that's my question.
Sure, because we need to finish. Who's going to tackle that one? Rob.
I'm not going to tackle it, but I'm just going to give
It's a whole conference in itself.
So one of the pieces of work that TDR is supporting is in 5 countries in sub-Saharan Africa, and traditionally we're focused on health, but this is a project which brings together agriculture, water resources, climate, and how that impacts on malaria. And so, in a sense, the project is really what we call community-based innovation, where it's the community that's measuring the temperature change, the malaria incidence, and those types of things, and feeding that data into a central database using mHealth technology, mobile phone technology. The database is held in South Africa. But all of this is trying to bring together for the community at their level how that level of climate change is impacting them. I mean, I don't think it's answering your question at a sort of planetary level, but I do think it illustrates that we need to think about that type of inclusivity and community-centered research, but it needs to be at all levels. I mean, I think it's a real challenge once you get to some of the areas where I work in, where you're really negotiating things between governments. You have to hope that by dealing with the government, you're dealing with the aggregated voice of the country. I mean, I know that's a very optimistic and sometimes naive hope, but that's what we have to work with, of course. And until we have an alternative approach, then I think that's going to be the big challenge. But I don't think it negates some of these grassroots and bottom-up things in the same
So
time.
we live in an imperfect world. You've shown us a way to move towards a better world through RRI. She's raising her eyebrows here. Very expressive eyebrows. But thank you so much, all of you. It's been a joy to hear from you. And I hope that all of you will take the opportunity to talk to these folk during the coffee break, because there's so much more that they have to tell you, and which will be enormously informative to us all. So please, would you thank them?